All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to be looking at 4D. So this is the last section that we'll cover in Chapter 4. And I think I'm going to do it in two shorter videos. There's a couple things I want to show you in the second video, but 4D here is kind of the reverse. So if you remember in 4B, we were trying to determine the accumulated value of an investment, right? Given a certain interest rate, certain number of times, the number of times that interest is compounded, the number of years, and also the initial deposit, right, that we called the principal. So now we're kind of looking at this from the opposite lens, okay? So what if we, because when you invest money, you are a loaner. You are loaning someone else or some other entity the money, okay? Now, when we borrow money, like if we use a credit card or if we buy a car on credit or we finance a house, things of that nature, then we are the borrower, okay? So we are paying the interest. And the entity that loaned us that money is the investor. And so we're going to kind of look at it from that perspective now. All right, so a loan, okay? So a loan, guys, is just money that's given with the expectation that it will be returned, typically with interest, okay? All right, so when we're talking about borrowing money, or when we are the borrower and not the investor, then the principal is the amount of money owed at any particular time, okay? So as an investor, the principal is what you are depositing or investing, but as a borrower, the principal is what you are borrowing, or in other words, the amount of money that you owe. So for example, if I buy a $20,000 car, then the principal is $20,000, and so the bank that's loaning me that money, that's like their principal. They are investing the $20,000, and then I'm going to pay them interest while I'm paying off the loan. So they get that compound interest. And then interest, this should be is charged on the principal of the loan. Okay, and then to pay off the loan, you must gradually pay down the principal, right? And that's why if you buy a car, you have monthly payments. And part of that payment goes to pay down the principal, and it also goes to pay the interest for that particular month. Because each month, your loan, or the principal, is generating interest, okay? And then the loan term is just the time that you have to pay back the loan. So if you're talking about a car, you can finance a car for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. You can even do it for 7 years now, okay? And lots of times people will finance a car for 7 years simply because extending the loan term will lower the monthly payment. But in the long run, you'll actually end up paying more on interest the more extended the loan term is.
It's mathematical reasoning course.
Yeah.
They don't do their work.
All right, guys, sorry about that. One of my colleagues came by to complain, I guess. Oh, anyway. Oh, yeah, as I was saying. So if you get a 3-year car loan, of course your monthly payments are going to be higher, but you'll pay it off quicker, and after it's all said and done, you will have paid less in interest, as opposed to, say, a 7-year car loan. The monthly payments will be lower, but after you have it paid off, you could look back and calculate and see that you actually paid a lot more in interest, okay? So that's the downside to having a longer loan term, is that you're going to end up paying more in interest. All right. So let's talk about this type of loan. This is probably the most common loan that you're going to see. An installment loan. It's also in the financial world referred to as an amortized loan. And you can get things called amortization tables, and they will show you, like month by month, how much of your payment goes to interest and how much goes to principal as you're paying it off. And so you could look, like if you're buying a house, you can get an amortization table. In fact, I wish I had one that I could show you real quick. And it'll show you, I need to get one for this class, but it'll show you kind of how the amount of your payment that goes to interest and principal changes throughout the lifetime of the loan. It's real interesting. Anyway, so what's special about this loan, guys, is that you pay it off with equal regular payments. Okay, so this is the one we're all kind of accustomed to seeing. Loans can be paid off in different ways. However, many people prefer to have monthly payments that are the same. Okay, there are some types of loans that you may have equal monthly payments, but then toward the end of the term, if the loan is not paid off by that last payment, then you have to make a balloon payment. Okay. Anyway, and another reason people like these loans, or they're so popular, is because it helps us allow us to budget, make a budget, right? Because we would need to have a fixed monthly payment to really be able to make a budget. And then mortgages, which is a fancy financial term for the loan for a house. Student loans, auto loans, these are all installment or amortized loans. Okay. Furthermore, guys, let me say another thing. Whenever you're getting ready to, now, it's rare for somebody to be able to pay cash for a car or for a house. Some people can, but most people simply do not have that much cash. And so we have to finance, or we have to borrow money to buy things, And so some, depending on what you're buying, sometimes they may require a down payment, sometimes they may not. Houses, of course, require a down payment. What I want to emphasize is that the larger the down payment that you can come up with, the better off that you'll be, because you're going to have to borrow less money. And if you're borrowing less money, you're going to pay less interest overall. So it's always a good idea to put down as much as you can afford. That means you're going to have to finance less. And that's going to help you in the long run. All right, well, I show this formula to my students not because we're going to use it in this class, but just because it's interesting, okay? Because most people are not as financial savvy as we're going to be. Okay, so you can use this formula right here, and you can calculate what your monthly payment would be. But to do that, you would need to know the principal, so how much you want to borrow. You would need to know the interest rate. Typically, N is always going to be 10, or not 10, but 12 rather. And then you would need to know the term of the loan. Okay, so my girlfriend recently bought a new automobile, and in the process of doing so, she was thinking about what she could afford, and she didn't really want to have a longer term loan, but if it meant a lower payment, then maybe it was necessary. And I can remember us kind of discussing it, and of course she was at the dealership, and they were giving her some different estimates as to what her payment would be given the different terms of the loan. So, a 5-year, a 6-year, or a 7-year. But I was telling her, I said, well, you could do all this yourself. You could use this formula right here. Well, I didn't tell her that, but that's true, guys. You could go, next time you're interested in buying a car or whatever, you could take this formula, your calculator and this formula, and you could figure out and calculate what your payment should be. Without this knowledge, we have to rely on the salesman. And maybe they're being honest and maybe they're not. Typically, they're being honest because they're bound by certain like fiduciary laws and things of that nature. But nonetheless, you know, you wouldn't even have to see anybody. You could, you know, be thinking about something that you want to buy. If you know how much it costs and, you know, roughly what the interest rate could be and how long you want to finance it for, you could figure out what your monthly payments are going to be. So this is an extremely powerful formula right here. But like I said, we're not going to use it in this course, but I do like to show my students. And there are also payment calculators online. You can do a search, and it'll ask for these parameters. It'll ask for P, the principal. It'll ask for the interest rate, the number of years. It usually always inputs 12 for the number of compounding periods. But anyway, all right, so yeah, I think we're gonna go over this last page, and then we'll terminate part 1, and then we'll do part 2. So let's look at this graphic that I pulled from the book, or this table here. I like this because it kind of shows how the amount of money in each month's payment is going to interest and to principal, okay? So it says this table shows the first 3 months of a $7,500 loan, and these are the monthly payments. So you're going to pay $95.01 every single month until it's paid off. And this says pay attention to how the amount of interest and the amount paid toward the principal are changing. So look at this first row. Let me zoom in. Here for month 1. So to find the interest, if you guys remember, well, it says here the interest rate is 9%. And it's a 10-year loan, okay? So what you do, if you recall from 4A, is you take this, divide it by 12, right? Because we're trying to find the monthly interest rate. And you would get 0.75%, which as a decimal would be 0.0075. And you multiply that by the principal, and this gives you the interest. So this is the amount of money of your payment that's going towards interest. And then if you subtract this from your payment, whatever's left over goes to principal. So that goes to actually paying off the loan. So after the first month, the loan is decreased by this amount right here. Okay? But what I want to point out is that initially, the majority of your payment goes to interest. Now look at month 2. We're still finding 0.75% of the balance, but now the balance is a little bit less. And so we're going to pay just a little bit less in interest, which allows us to pay a little bit more in principal that next month. Okay? And this process continues. So you look in month 3, a little more, a little less goes to interest, and a little bit more is going to principal. And this continues throughout the lifetime of the loan, such that at the very end, that very last payment, almost all of it goes to principal, and hardly anything goes to interest. It reverses, okay? And there's another graphic that we'll see in part 2 that illustrates this. That's why, guys, if you're financing something and you have some extra money, it's always a good idea to try to pay extra each month, especially at the beginning, because at the beginning is when you're paying most of your payments going to interest. So if you were going to pay extra during the lifetime of the loan, it would be best to do it at the beginning, okay? If you can afford it. Of course, I have a mortgage, okay, so I'm financing a house, and I always try to pay a little bit extra every single month if I can afford it. I don't know that there's actually been a single month where I didn't pay at least $50 extra. Ideally, I like to try to pay $200 or $300 extra, because that means that I'm going to pay that loan off a lot sooner. It's a 30-year mortgage, but if I could keep paying $200 or $300 extra each month, then I could maybe have it paid off in 17 or 18 years as opposed to 30, okay? And I will end up saving money in interest. I won't pay as much in interest either. All right, let's talk about one last thing, and we'll stop. As a fixed well, I sort of said this, but let me read this. So as a fixed payment loan progresses, the percentage of each payment that goes toward the interest and principal change. Okay, so we saw that evidenced in this table right here. Initially, the majority of the monthly payment goes to interest, and the rest goes to principal. Toward the end of the loan's lifetime, the majority of the monthly payment goes to the principal and very little in interest, because the principal now is so small that it can't draw any interest, hardly. Okay, and there's another figure that we're going to see in part 2 here. Also, well, I mentioned this earlier, choices of rate and term. This is important. So whether you're buying a car or a house, guys, there are choices in the term of the loan. Okay. So for example, a bank may offer you a 3-year car loan at 8% interest, a 4-year car loan at 9%, and a 5-year car loan at 10%. You'll pay less total interest with the shortest term. Okay. So even though the monthly payments will be higher, after the car is paid for, you will have paid less in interest. And you'll also get the lowest rate. Okay? The longer the loan term, the higher the interest rate, typically. And the reason for that is because from a lender's perspective, the longer the term of that loan, the riskier that investment. That means there's more time that you could default on that loan. And so to hedge against that risk, they charge you a little bit higher interest rate. And the same thing for houses. They offer 10-year mortgages. Okay, most people don't get them because the mortgage payments are really high. Typically, most people finance a house for 30 years, but there are 15-year loans as well. I actually had a 10-year loan one time. My ex-wife and I, we had our first house completely paid for. So when we sold it, we put all that money as down payment for the second house that we bought, which meant that there wasn't all that much money left to finance, so we just financed it for 10 years, and then we paid extra on it and got it paid for as fast as we could. But anyway, I'm trying to think. Anyway, I think I'll go for now. I may try to pull up some other graphics for us to look at so that I can show you in part 2. But anyway, I'll see you in part 2, guys.